Friends, President Donald Trump has done it again. He has done it again. This man is unpredictable. This man is unpredictable. Just yesterday, his troops went to Venezuela to capture Maduro, President Maduro, and we all know what is going on. Let's watch this.
Last night, on the order of the President of the United States and in support of a request from the Department of Justice, as the President said, the United States military conducted an apprehension mission in Caracas, Venezuela, to bring to justice two indicted persons, Nicolas and Cecilia Maduro. This operation, known as Operation Absolute Resolve, was discreet, precise, and conducted during the darkest hours of January 2nd and was the culmination of months of planning and rehearsal, an operation that, frankly, only the United States military could undertake. What I'd like to do this morning is talk to you through some of the preparation and the details without compromising any of our tactics, techniques, and procedures. There is always a chance that we'll be tasked to do this type of mission again. Our interagency work began months ago and built on decades of experience of integrating complex air, ground, space, and maritime operations. While the past 2 decades have honed the skills of our special operations forces, this particular mission required every component of our joint force, with soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians working in unison with our intelligence agency partners and law enforcement teammates in an unprecedented operation. We leveraged our unmatched intelligence capabilities and our years of experience in hunting terrorists. And we could not have done this mission without the incredible work by various intelligence agencies, including the CIA, NSA, and NGA. We watched, we waited, we prepared, we remained patient and professional. This mission was meticulously planned, drawing lessons from decades of missions over the last many years, many missions over these last many years. This was an audacious operation that only the United States could do. It required the utmost of precision and integration within our joint force. And the word integration does not explain the sheer complexity of such a mission. An extraction so precise it involved more than 150 aircraft launching across the Western Hemisphere in close coordination, all coming together in time and place to layer effects for a single purpose: to get an interdiction force into downtown Caracas while maintaining the element of tactical surprise. Failure of one component of this well-oiled machine would have endangered the entire mission, and failure is never an option for America's joint force. Those in the air over Caracas last night were willing to give their lives for those on the ground and in the helicopters. Let me talk a little bit about the preparation. After months of work by our intelligence teammates to find Maduro and understand how he moved, where he lived, where he traveled, what he ate, what he wore, what were his pets. In early December, our force was set pending a series of aligned events. Key was choosing the right day to minimize the potential for civilian harm and maximize the element of surprise and minimize the harm to the indicted personnel so, as the President said, they could be brought to justice. And as the President said earlier today, weather in Venezuela is always a factor this time of the year. And over the weeks through Christmas and New Year's, the men and women of the United States military sat ready, patiently waiting for the right triggers to be met and the President to order us into action. Last night, the weather broke just enough, clearing a path that only the most skilled aviators in the world could maneuver through. Ocean, mountain, low cloud ceilings. But when tasked with a mission, this organization does not quit. At 10:46 p.m. Eastern Time last night, the President ordered the United States military to move forward with this mission. He said to us, and we appreciate it, Mr. President, good luck and Godspeed. And those words were transmitted to the entire Joint Force. Over the course of the night, aircraft began launching from 20 different bases on land and sea across the Western Hemisphere. In total, more than 150 aircraft, bombers, fighters, intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance, rotary wing were in the air last night. Thousands and thousands of hours of experience were airborne. Our youngest crew member was 20, and our oldest crew member was 49, and there's simply no match for American military might. As the night began, the helicopters took off with the extraction force, which included law enforcement officers, and began their flight into Venezuela at 100 feet above the water. As they approached Venezuelan shores, the United States began layering different effects provided by Spacecom, Cybercom, and other members of the interagency to create a pathway. Overhead, those forces were protected by aircraft from the United States Marines, the United States Navy, the United States Air Force, and the Air National Guard. The force included F-22s, F-35s, F-18s, EA-18s, E-2s, B-1 bombers, and other support aircraft, as well as numerous remotely piloted drones. As the force began to approach Caracas, the Joint Air Component began dismantling and disabling the air defense systems in Venezuela, employing weapons to ensure the safe passage of the helicopters into the target area. The goal of our air component is, was, and always will be to protect the helicopters and the ground force and get them to the target and get them home. As the force crossed the last point of high terrain where they'd been hiding in the clutter, we assessed that we had maintained totally the element of surprise. As the helicopter force ingressed towards the objective at low level, we arrived at Maduro's compound at 1:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 2:01 a.m. Caracas local time, and the apprehension force descended into Maduro's compound and moved with speed, precision, and discipline towards their objective and isolated the area to ensure the safety and security of the ground force while apprehending the indicted persons. On arrival into the target area, the helicopters came under fire, and they replied with that fire with overwhelming force in self-defense. One of our aircraft was hit but remained flyable, and as the President said earlier today, all of our aircraft came home, and that aircraft remained flyable during the rest of the mission. As the operation unfolded at the compound, our air and ground intelligence teams provided real-time updates to the ground force, ensuring those forces could safely navigate the complex environment without unnecessary risk. The force remained protected by overhead tactical aviation. Maduro and his wife, both indicted, gave up and were taken into custody by the Department of Justice, assisted by our incredible U.S. military with professionalism and precision, with no loss of U.S. life. After securing the indicted persons, the force began to prep for departure. Helicopters were called in to exfiltrate the extraction force, while fighter aircraft and remotely piloted aircraft provided overhead coverage and suppressive fire. There were multiple self-defense engagements as the force began to withdraw out of Venezuela. The force successfully exfiltrated and returned to their afloat launch bases, and the force was over the water at 3:29 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with indicted persons on board, and both Maduro and his wife were embarked aboard the USS Iwo Jima. In closing, what we've witnessed today is a powerful demonstration of America's joint force. We think, we develop, we train, we rehearse, we debrief, we rehearse again and again, not to get it right, but to ensure that we cannot get it wrong. Our jobs are to integrate combat power so when the order comes, we can deliver overwhelming force at the time and the place of our choosing against any foe anywhere in the world. I am immensely proud today of our joint force and filled with gratitude to represent them here today. There is simply no mission too difficult for these incredible professionals and the families that stand by them and support them. As we stand here this morning, our forces remain in the region at a high state of readiness, prepared to project power, defend themselves, and our interests in the region. This operation is a testament to the dedication and unwavering commitment to justice and our resolve to hold accountable those who threaten peace and stability.
So, as I said, we all know what is going on between the US and Venezuela, or should I say, between Donald Trump and Maduro. Now, Donald Trump has captured Maduro, the president of Venezuela. And, on the one hand, there are some Adventists that are trying to connect the dots in the context of Bible prophecy. Some Adventists are saying that what happened yesterday concerning U.S. capturing Maduro in Venezuela actually shows something prophetic in Revelation chapter 13, where we see the beast power displayed, okay? Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. Verse 12, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Verse 13, he performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. 14, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. Verse 15 says, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Verse 16, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or their foreheads. And verse 17 says, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the number of his name. So according to some SDAs that are trying to connect the dots in the context of Bible prophecy, they are saying that what US did yesterday by capturing Maduro was a display of the beast power. And there are other Adventists, on the other hand, that are saying that this has nothing to do with Bible prophecy. In an interview this afternoon, Brother James Bowen shared his thought on whether the capturing of Maduro has any biblical or prophetic meaning. All right, so I want us to actually listen to Brother Bowen on what he has to say.
I think when people are speaking about Bible prophecy, especially the watching Adventists, I think in most people's minds, they're probably thinking about the final crisis in Revelation 13 and Revelation 14 about the mark of the beast. Now, we know we're not there quite yet, but there is Bible prophecy that I think we're seeing fulfilled. And to that sense, I would point to actually Matthew 24, where we know that ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places. So we certainly know in a general sense that there is going to be wars and rumors of wars at the end of time. Now, there's a couple of things that strike me as interesting about this event. One is that the National Catholic Register actually commented that there was a priest who became a confidant of Venezuela's Maduro, actually a Jesuit priest by the name of Numa Molina. And so there was a little bit of connection between Rome and Maduro there. But in other sources, I'm finding that he was known to be critical in some cases of certain Catholic Church individuals. And so I found it was interesting recently that Tradwest, which is kind of a traditional Catholic influencer, they have like 263,000 followers. And they commented that they had this meme of the Catholic Church must go. And Pope Leo's like, who must go? And he's holding this baseball bat. And then you have this picture of Trump with Maduro and Pope Leo kind of, making this motion, which was actually back at his inauguration. But they've kind of meshed them together to kind of send this message of, wait a second, Maduro's rhetoric said the Catholic Church must go. No, 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 he must go. Now, in that sense, all I can say is it's interesting that that's the way some of their own traditionalists are portraying it. So kind of as if the United States was this helpful power that came along and removed somebody that was a problem to Rome. And I'm not going to read too much into that, but there is one thing that I do find interesting in Spirit of Prophecy. In recent years, there's been a lot of discussion about BRICS. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with BRICS, but I believe the acronym, we kind of have NATO, which is kind of the Northern Alliance. And then we've got BRICS, kind of the Southern Alliance, which is the acronym stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now, amidst those allies, there have been many people who have commented that Venezuela was kind of aligning itself with Russia and China and, some of these other powers. And what I do find interesting, it will be interesting to see what happens in the future. There is a statement in Spirit of Prophecy actually kind of alluding to this union of power at the end of time, specifically BRICS, and then juxtaposing it perhaps with America, where she says in India, China, Russia, and the cities of America, thousands of men and women are dying of starvation. The moneyed men, because they have the power, control the market. They purchase at low rates all they can obtain and then sell at greatly increased prices. This means starvation to the poorer classes and will result in a civil war. And then she says, there will be a time of trouble such as there never was since the nation, and at that time shall Michael stand up. So obviously referencing the kind of the close of probation in Daniel 12 there, what is interesting to me is that trio, India, China, and Russia. I mean, we're seeing those power players right now and many, pretty much united in their efforts and diplomacy and whatnot. So I find it interesting with Venezuela kind of in that mix and how America's responding to them. But I wouldn't take it too far. But I think in the future, we need to keep our eyes open and pay attention to what's happening in India, China, Russia, because obviously, whatever happens, she doesn't exclude the cities of America from the calamities that will follow. So we know that America is going to be kind of wrapped up into that chaos at some point as well.
Okay. So, there is this narrative that is also circulating that, America is doing this because Venezuela has a lot of oil and Trump is interested in getting the oil. So, what do you have to say about that too?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that we live in a time where there are, there are other reasons for why people do things. Greed is definitely, I think, a problem that we see at the end of time. And as far as reading into it further beyond that, I mean, I think the United States has done stuff in the past for various reasons, and in many cases. As Adventists, I think it's important to not take political sides in the situation. So as much as I think it might be unjust, I'm not going to necessarily say this is a political problem with Trump. I would say it's a human problem that unfortunately many people are greedy, and I think it's reflected in the nation as well. The Bible has some words in Proverbs 28, verse 25, a greedy man stirs up strife, but the one who trusts in the Lord will be enriched. And Proverbs 15, verse 27, whoever is greedy for unjust gain troubles his own household, but he who hates bribes will live. And we also know that in terms of greed, in 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11, the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revelers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. So it's interesting to me, if that is a reason why we went to war with Venezuela, and I say if, because I'm not going to pretend to read hearts here. I would say, it's unfortunate that these individuals who are speaking about a great American revival, a national day of prayer coming up, a 250th celebration of America's, heritage, it would be very sad for them to simultaneously being and going and committing greedy acts and as a cover. That's unfortunate, but we'll see.
Okay, so I would like to ask if you see the military might portrayed by America on the Sabbath morning. Do you see the same thing ahead of us in the final crisis? During the final crisis,
yeah, it's interesting. There's a comment in Daniel 11 verse 31 where it speaks about the king of the north, and I think this is something that some commenters have spoken about. And this power in Daniel 11 verse 30 to 35, there's a few characteristics that identify it. One of the things that it's done in the past is it has persecuted. In verse 33, we see that it persecuted many by sword, flame, captivity, and by spoil. But what I find interesting is in arms shall stand on his part. So we see, this king of the north power, which was identified by even in beginning stages of Adventist history as the papacy, and how it has used arms to go and enact its policies. So I think at the end of time, we're going to see the United States form an image to Rome. And ultimately, I think you'll see the use of physical weapons, not the sword of the Spirit, but physical weapons, as a means of enforcing and coercing those nations that don't go along with its policies. And I think that's going to be critical towards the United States ultimately playing that role in Bible prophecy that we've long expected of enforcing the mark of the beast and, punishing nations that don't go along with it. There's a lot of traditional Catholics out there that are commenting about how they're very much in favor of the Crusades and that we need to be Crusader Christians. I mean, that's what SOCOM, the Southern Command, actually, they had a Crusader's cross on a helmet recently. It's tattooed on Secretary of Defense Hegseth's arm. You see this kind of mindset of arms standing on their part, the kingdom of God coming in a very physical sense. And you can see that represented at the Department of War, where some of the clips that they have played here recently showing all of these battleships and airplanes and everything else. It's this idea, a very I guess, post-millennial idea of establishing a kingdom of God on this earth. Christ said his kingdom was not of this world. And in Revelation, one of the strongest texts, where it speaks about hiding in the caves and in the rocks, in Revelation chapter 6, when the coming of the Lamb comes, you see these kings of the earth in Revelation 6, verse 15, who are hiding and calling on the rocks to fall on them. So this picture right here at the end of time when Christ comes, the second coming, is not that God's kingdom, is in a physical sense reigning on the earth, but rather there are still kings opposed to God's kingdom who flee at his second coming. So therefore, the stone in Daniel 2 has to reference Christ's second coming when he establishes. That's when the kingdom is delivered to the saints. What these individuals are trying to establish in an earthly physical kingdom now is actually totally contrary to what the Bible reveals about God's true kingdom.
Okay, friends, so that was the stand or the thought of Brother James Bowen, and we thank him for commenting. And what we're going to do this particular year is that we're going to bring people on board to comment on events that are taking place both within and also outside of the church. So we thank Brother James Bowen for joining us this afternoon to share his thoughts on the subject. All right, so friends, I want to also know your thoughts about the current events of U.S. capturing Maduro. Is there anything connecting with Bible prophecy? Do we see Revelation 13 in what happened yesterday? Share your thoughts in the comment. There are more stories coming up, there are more stories coming up. So don't go anywhere. Stay right here and see you again. God bless.